Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Pricing Committee. So, what are we talking about today? I've seen a kind of obvious but non-obvious theme. And the obvious theme is that AI is going to be consumption-based pricing. Now, people are denying it. People are talking about outcomes, and other people are talking about pay for the employee. And then some people are still trying to extend the seats with a few hybrid things. It's all very complicated. But essentially, we haven't got to reinvent the wheel. The wheel, unfortunately, or fortunately, has been invented in the early noughties, and it was invented by AWS. And that wheel is, every time it goes around, we're going to charge you. We're going to charge you literally every single rotation of that wheel. Now, not to over-egg that metaphor anymore, back in 2007, I think 2007-8, just pre-GFC, AWS realized obviously they got good engineering staff and they had compute that they could sell. So their first clients were the guys and girls at YC even. I don't know where I got GC from, not General Counsel. And they were like, well, yeah, I don't have to rack servers and spend £1 million getting the info up. Yeah, Bob's your uncle, I'll use it. So in that sense, it was always going to work with a very new emerging class of entrepreneur stroke tech company. But it's very hard for them to break into kind of the big boys, the big enterprises, the kind of Fortune 50, 100, 250, etc. That came much later with Microsoft when 2010, 11, 12, 13, with Azure really saying, well, we can do this cloud stuff like AWS. We know it works because look at these companies who have IPO'd and they're worth a fortune. It works. So it wasn't really a question how it's going to be priced. Kind of Jeff and his team, Jeff Bezos said, look, this is the way it's going to be priced. It's a utility, it's like electric. Why on earth would you build your own dynamo? You don't need to. Just pay per use. So what's non-obvious now is why there is such resistance to consumption-based pricing. And you could argue that we've had this whole wave in pricing of value-based pricing and even recently talking about outcomes and stuff. But the most profitable companies, which unfortunately are the cloud and the kind of platform advertisers, the Google and Meta, have never used anything else but a form of consumption. And you could even argue a click is a form of consumption. It's more like an event-based pricing, but it's a form of consumption. So all pricing committees are now considering how do we move to what is, you might say, really, really obvious because it's been done since 2007-8 and it's worked, and they can see the revenue models of these cloud companies and they're pretty damn good. Increasing revenues at 6, 7, 8, 10, 15% by maybe half price increase, half growth. Yeah, it's a pretty good business. And so the market knows that these companies can make the revenue. And what the reluctance is, and the pricing committees are starting to feel that because they're under pressure to agree a new model, which they know is inevitable, but no one wants to be first. So essentially you can call it pricing poker, and or even better, pricing usage poker. We know that AI will be usage-based pricing. It could be event, I suppose, maybe, but it's probably going to be consumption-based pricing. So realistically, the game is how long can we resist that call? And in terms of the poker, the kind of usage pricing poker, who is going to be first? Because they know whoever's first is the first CFO who kind of says that I'm willing to forego some predictability. So if we start to go through some of the articles that kind of tie into that theme, and as you know, every single day I have a myriad of Google alerts about AI, including whether it be token usage, agent pricing, even what Salesforce has done for the last 2 or 3 days. So let's just pull up one of those articles and go through that. So if we look at the first article, Salesforce, always Salesforce. To be fair to the geezer, Mark Benioff, he's tried a million different ways of monetizing AI, and went from the agent force to the paper agent to outcome based. Now he's doing like extensive ELAs, adding Einstein. The bloke has got a lot of stuff going on. And so essentially his latest iteration, or one of his latest iterations in Salesforce pricing, has been to go headless, which means you can basically use the back end and use your own front end without going into too much detail. This is cool. Sounds like a good product. The workflow's there behind the scenes, and people are obviously heavily embedded, and you can argue tech indebted to Salesforce. But what it really means is that CFOs are having to think, how do I play this poker game? And the poker game comes in to account because what we're saying is the market has been very, very used to the way we price. They've had a very, very, very good predictability on the way we are going to report revenue for the next quarter, 6 months, a year. And that was simply based on the most Mickey Mouse formula. What's your revenue now? What's your churn going to be roughly? How much are you going to increase the spend of the people existing? And generally, are you going to increase your price in doing so? And are you going to get anybody new? So say you're going to lose, worst case, 5% of the clients. Okay, you've gone down to 95, but the existing clients spend 10% more, so you've gone up to about 104-ish and a bit. Then you're also going to increase prices generically because that's what you do. You might go up another 5% there, which might be another kind of get up to 108. And then you're going to add 2 points of kind of growth. You're kind of 110. And obviously that can change. It could be at 120, whatever, or 90, anything's gone pear-shaped. But very, very predictable within a very, 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 very tight band. And so there are two classes of people that really cared about such huge amounts of predictability. One are the investors, and two, internal politics, CEO and CFO, because they know that predicts how much they can pay out in stock-based comp and how they can budget. The whole thing's been beautiful. But essentially, someone thrown a spanner in that works. And that spanner was thrown many, 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 many years ago. And it was by Jeff Bezos, you could argue, in the early days of 07, 08, when he basically said, look, I've got really good staff. I know how to do this extensive compute thing and storage thing where we've made AWS backend kind of on the back of really good at being good at kind of Amazon.com. Yeah, why don't you use it? And people are like, well, what are you talking about? I'm going to just build my own server, Mac servers, etc., and build my own kind of place where I'd house all my IT kit. And that obviously works for big firms, but obviously if you're a YC startup is where he started. He offered almost like electricity on service or compute on service and everything else on service. So that was always going to be a winner. As his point is, why buy your own dynamo when electricity you can just plug it into your house? And it's a very compelling argument. And so that's 2007, 8, and then it started to proliferate 10s, 11, 12, 13s, etc. as Azure, Microsoft's version of AWS, started to penetrate the enterprise market. And so realistically, at minimum, we've had 15 years. 15 years worth of CFOs getting used to consumption-based pricing. But they haven't really got used to it because essentially the workloads and the computes weren't as heavy enough to have a massive variability once you actually embedded it. So observe it for about 6 to 12 months, and you could probably have a high level of prediction how much the costs are. You knew your storage was only going up maybe 10, 20, 13% in terms of the actual volume, which fractional costs means maybe, 2, 3, 4, 5% increase in storage costs. And you knew your compute wasn't going well because you wasn't doing AI or machine learning massively across most firms in 2010, 11, 12, 13, even pre-COVID. So what's changed is, excuse me, that companies have had to think, do I really want to introduce AI? And luckily they've been given no choice. The FOMO is massive, and therefore you have to have some sort of AI interaction, whether you like it or not, as the CFO and CEO. So that's forced their hand in a kind of mimetic way But no one's yet forced their hand mimetically about pricing. One, because no one cares about the pricing. Two, it's really boring for the most folk. And three, they don't want to play the pricing poker with the stock market. And the pricing poker is everybody knows kind of what hand everybody had, but no one wants to put the first card down, other than obviously Mark Benioff, who's, to be fair, not winning yet, but is a legend, and I'm sure at some point he will win with his pricing models, given that he's willing to change it literally every 6 months, much to the annoyance of everybody. So that says we now need to think we're living on a meter. We're playing this poker game with Wall Street, so I don't want to do Q3 or Q4 or Q1 27 with usage-based being the predominant model that we say we're now going towards. We can wait off, and we can hopefully have one or two big boys and girls do it before we do. And that poker game is basically one of the reasons why this headline is so relevant, because you wouldn't be concerned if you just said, well, we're going to be living off the meter. Let me reconfigure my whole kind of forecasting to budgeting to the way I run the firm. That needs to be done. But what we're trying to do is kick the can down the road in the interim. So the second headline, if I move on to it, is AlphaSeek. Now, AlphaSeek is primarily investing, but you can see the investor anxiety as well. And so they're talking about the monetization shift to UBP being a problem for certain companies, but also maybe a boon for others. And what do investors need to know? Well, the flat subscription is kind of not dead and not even in a coma, but it's slowly basically getting older. And it meant the work of a broker analyst was always difficult, but it wasn't that difficult, because back to the example of predict the churn, kind of what's the NRR expected, what kind of uplift you expected in there, then what kind of price you're going to uplift in terms of your pricing that hasn't been affected by the old people already, and then obviously new clientele that you're going to bring on board. Yeah, you could really largely predict what the revenue is going to be. And so it's kind of not impossible to miss predictions, but it was harder. Now you're talking much more like a car manufacturer like Tesla, which has got wild earnings. No one knows how much the product is being sold and the credits it got back from the government. It's a much harder stock to predict, and therefore it has much more volatility than say, an average SaaS company, because the stock market just don't know how to predict it. And so here he's basically saying HubSpot, Gen Digital, I think they're hardware, basically infrastructure. Amazon, which has always been that way, but particularly let's take HubSpot. HubSpot basically have got a really good per seat model, very similar to Salesforce, but operating with a slightly different clientele, lower down, more SMB type thing, maybe 10 grand kind of contract per annum versus 100 grand, you'd argue. They're going to be one of the key bellwethers, along with Salesforce, of how do they move to this, dare I say the word about getting a red card, agentic world, where you're allowing an agent to do something that you allow an employee, but they'd be limited with time and scope and career risk. An agent has no career risk. They can do all sorts of crazy shit. As we've seen with the spending and the rumours recently that spending's been going through the roof at some companies, Uber, another company which no one mentioned, they might think it's Amazon, but not to slander them, that's allegedly, who spent 500 million. So unconstrained agent use is also pretty much Wild West. So that's the investor lens on similarly the poker. So the CFO's basically got his or her card, and they're looking at everybody else thinking, who is going to play the first card? We all know we have the same hand, but who is going to play the first card? And this is investors pretty much saying the same thing. So what you'll notice, I didn't share that tab, so there's a tab there, just if you don't believe me. And then if we go to the last tab, which is a picture of Sundar, nice little picture there. And this is from Mint, which I'm not quite sure what Mint is, but this is a very good article. And what it shows is that Google is best placed for what might be a cost game. If you're sitting in a pricing committee now, you've got some of the most elaborate pricing ideas coming out. Some are really good, but some are a little bit left field, or not left field, but really hard to implement. And if you think SaaS worked for a reason, because your grandma can work out a SaaS calculation. Your grandma could work out your NDR or NRR pretty much, and yes, your grandma could probably predict Salesforce's. This is 2 years ago or 5 years ago. Could predict Salesforce's next quarter within 2, 3, 4%. So we're moving from that world. We've seen the anxiety with AlphaSeek. We've seen the anxiety, obviously, with CIOs. You can see it on both sides. If there was a CFO.com, which I'm sure there is, if I wanted to go on it, they would have the same issue. And what the issue is they're saying we need to completely reconfigure our architecture in finance. And this is Google, who have completely re-architected their infrastructure for AI, from the TPU, then the chips, all the way through basically the way they train models. They've got their own models all the way through, obviously making users use it and forcing people on search to use AI, whether they like it or not. So they've really got a full stack end to end where they're less reliant on, obviously they haven't got a cloud provider, they are one, they're not reliant on NVIDIA, and they also can get their model to market. So they've got the complete stack. It is literally fully integrated. And why is that important? That's important because if you, as a committee member, believe that AI is going to be that important, then you're basically saying you're living in a token world. And if you're living in a token world, you're living on the meter. And if you're living on the meter, then the most important thing is that you monitor the meter. Who's using it? How much is being allocated to that person? Are they over? Can they repurpose it or rehypothecate it to someone else? How do we crack down on this person? And for those of you old enough to remember, the early days of the really sexy photocopiers, I think we can just stop sharing this. So essentially you could argue that photocopies are a good model of kind of a razor blade model where you buy the product particularly cheaply, printer in my case, photocopy in my case, and then you have to print a straight photocopier, then you basically have to pay per sheet. So in many ways you could argue that getting the model for free is kind of a razor blade model where you get the model for free, but obviously it costs a fortune to use. So really what we're saying is that the poker game being played is going to have to be won by the person that basically shows their hand first. And that will come with a lot of pain because they'll be the first person that the market kind of rejects and says, oh, but we can predict the others, but we can't predict yours. But essentially, the whole market will be run on a meter. If you believe AI is the next big thing, which most CEOs and CFOs have said it is. If it is, it's pretty much inevitable that you'll be running on the meter. And as a result, literally from the investor all the way down to your staff, the way you control stuff has to be reconfigured on that basis that the meter is going to dominate your operating model. And that meter has a unit of currency, and that's called the token. That's the committee for today. And the committee is pretty much saying that it's inevitable that the meter will be running your budgets. The only choice you have is whether you install the meter or whether you let someone else install your meter for you. Okay, that's it for the day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.